Greetings, everyone. Exactly 2 months back, on December 17th, 2021, we kicked off a unique series of innovations in clean air technologies, featuring dialogues and discussions with experts from Corning Incorporated. Corning, as you'd all know, is one of the world's leading innovators in material science with a 169-year track record of life-changing innovations. Corning is committed to researching, developing, and engineering environmental products that improve the quality of the air we breathe. The company creates ceramic substrates and particulate filters that form the core of world-class pollution control systems, from light-duty passenger cars to heavy-duty trucks and construction equipment. Our first dialogue was with Dr. Willard A. Cutler, Division Vice President and Commercial Technology Director at Corning Environmental Technologies. And today, we are delighted and honored to have with us Dr. Ameya Joshi, Director for Emerging Technologies at Corning, Inc. Our focus today is on global trends and regulations in clean air technologies. But before I invite Dr. Joshi for a quick presentation, I would like to highlight some of the critical messages from our session with Dr. Cutler. He said, Corning partners and works with OEMs to develop new technologies that then allows it to reduce the gaseous emissions or the particulate emissions that allow for new regulations. Commenting on the transformation in the mobility ecosystem from ICEs to EVs and other alternate greener propulsion technologies, Dr. Cutler said there are a number of challenges to get from where we are today to where we would like to be in the future. India, he said, is quite fortunate in that most of the technology needed to meet both current regulations and future regulations has already been invented, because regulations typically cascade from Europe to other parts of the world. If the US moved to 100% BEVs by 2040, the reduction in the particulate in tons was only about 17%, found a Corning study. So those vehicles sold between now and 2040 are going to be producing emissions for many decades to come, Dr. Cutler noted. The good thing, though, is that we have technology that exists today to dramatically reduce pollution across IC engines. Now, one last thing before I invite Ameya for his presentation is a quick reminder to all our participants today that you have an opportunity to interact with him. So do send in your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens so I can pick them up towards the end of our session today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ameya Joshi, Director of Emerging Technologies and Regulations at Corning, where he follows advances in engines, emission control technologies, and electrification for the company's Environmental Technologies division. He provides credible technical guidance to engage regulators, customers, and other automotive suppliers on the direction of emissions regulations globally and their impact on future technology choices. Ameya currently serves as an associate editor for the SAE Journal of Engines, publishing editor for the journal Emission Control Science and Technology, and the editorial board member of the Transportation Engineering Journal. He's also a reviewer of various projects funded by the US Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office through the annual Merit Review. He received his PhD from the University of Delaware in mechanical engineering. Welcome, Ameya. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dipanshu. So I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you for inviting me. And good evening to everyone in India who's joined, and good morning to folks here in the US and elsewhere. So maybe I'll just start sharing my screen here and we'll dive right into it. So I have prepared quite a bit of material. As Dipanshu was saying, obviously, please send in your questions. I've tried to keep it fairly broad to give a flavor of all the new regulations and technologies that are either developing or have developed recently towards clean air technologies, right? So let's just go right into it. So first of all, just to acknowledge, the problem that we're trying to solve here, right, is criteria pollutant emissions, right? We're emissions of NOx, hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, particulates, and so on, right? These are still a big issue across the world. here's one of the recent studies which showed that there are still about 4 million deaths annually, 4 million premature deaths that are linked with fine particulate pollution. And by fine particulates, these are typically referred to as PM 2.5 or particles below 2.5 microns, right? Now, just a quick note here already that tailpipe emissions from cars are typically in the, I would say, 50 to 150 nanometer range. So these are much finer than just what is denoted by PM 2.5. So these are very fine particles. They go deep into our lungs and cause a whole host of health issues, cardiovascular diseases, and they are even known to cross over the blood barrier and go into and found in other organs and so on, right? So not good stuff. They cause a lot of health issues and early deaths. And this paper pointed out, I mean, obviously you can see here that just the color coding that highly populated countries like India and China are really bearing the brunt of these pollution issues, right? Now, quick to point out, these are not all caused by transportation, right? There's a whole host of factors listed down here, but still transportation clearly plays an important role. In fact, on the right, you can see there was another study. It's a very highly regarded study, Global Burden of Disease, which pointed out the number of deaths by risk factor in India in 2019. And you can see that air pollution is actually the highest. It's not, it's followed by high blood pressure and sugar and so on. But air pollution is still by far the highest cause of premature deaths in India, right? So just to put it in context, this is clearly a problem that still needs to be solved despite decades of improvements in regulation technologies. I just added this. I was in India in 2019 in Delhi, and one of those really bad days where schools were about to be closed. And as I entered the hotel where I was staying, there was this sign which said, "Look, the PM 2.5 outside in the city is 197, and inside our guest rooms is only 5." So that is the way they were promoting their rooms, which I thought was very clever. Now, just to put it in context, 5 microgram per meter cube is the current latest air quality guideline issued by the World Health Organization. India currently has a air quality guideline of 40. The World Health Organization, of course, has set more stringent standards of 5, but that's the level that's deemed to be necessary for healthy, air. And you can see that 200 is not where we want to be, obviously. So more work needs to be done on reducing the pollutants. Okay, so much for that. Now, just a quick sort of overview of what do we mean when we say exhaust emissions from tailpipe, right? So very broadly, first, just to get it clear that there are greenhouse gases and criteria pollutants, right? Greenhouse gases which lead to global warming, and criteria pollutants which I discussed previously on the previous slide, leading to health issues, right? Greenhouse gases are primarily CO2, which is the product of combustion, but then also methane and nitrous oxide, right? And methane and nitrous oxide are very potent greenhouse gases, which have multiples of CO2 in terms of the global warming potential, right? So this left side is solved by improving efficiency of the combustion engine and other measures, right? We are focusing more on the right today, which is criteria pollutants. And that again is divided into 2. There's the gas emissions, which is CO, hydrocarbon, NOx, others such as formaldehyde, ammonia. These are increasingly being regulated as well. But then there's also particulates, right? And today there are 2 leading sort of ways of regulating particulates. One is the particle number standards that India has adopted, as is Europe, China, and many other countries. And then there's the US particle mass standard, right? So in the US, the limits are based on particle mass in milligrams per mile. In India, it is number per kilometer, right? The rest of these species are also in milligram per kilometer in India. In the US, it's in milligram per mile. So again, a difference in how these are measured, right? There are finer differences in the test procedures and so on, which I will hint at as we go. Now, we as emission control technology suppliers, we provide broadly two classes of products. One is particulate filters, shown on the right, and I'll go a little detail into that, and then substrates, which and I'm showing one that's one of those. The blue is like one of those components there, which deals with converting CO and hydrocarbon into CO2 and water, right? So these are two core components of addressing the gas and particulates, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Yeah, very importantly, this still doesn't cover everything that's regulated. So, or this covers everything that's regulated, but there's still more species that are not covered under regulations, such as black carbon. Black carbon is a component of soot, which has a very high global warming potential as well, but it doesn't have a specific limit in the regulations. Polyaromatic hydrocarbons, these are nasty carcinogenic chemicals, which are part of unburned hydrocarbons, but again, they are in very small quantities and they're not regulated today. Secondary organic aerosols and other emissions. I quickly mention non-tailpipe emissions here because important to keep that in mind that now as we're going towards near zero tailpipe emissions, non-tailpipe emissions such as those from tires and brakes are actually becoming a bigger portion of the fleet emissions today. And those are going to continue even with electrification, for example, right? So something to keep in mind that this is going to be the next wave of issues that we grapple with. All right. So a very quick summary of and a high-level summary of the regulations in leading markets of the world. And I realize this is a busy slide, but I'll try to go through it. So starting from today to 2035-ish. So at the very top, of course, I have India, which has fuel economy regulations set till 22, a 15% reduction versus 2017. And I believe we still don't have the next fuel economy standards set, but they should be coming, right? And then they should be strengthening with time. We've clearly started with BS6 in 2020, and BS6 stage 2 will kick off in 23. That's where the real world driving emission norms start. That's where cars are tested on the road as well as on lab tests, right? And in India, we still use the NEDC test cycle. And in Europe, China, they've moved on to this WLTP, which is more representative of real world dynamic driving cycle. So I'm very confident at some point India will move to WLTP as well. And it doesn't have to be at stage 2, it could be earlier, but it's an important change that will happen considering India is following the best practices in Europe. BS7, I'm just putting in there as a, question mark tentative. Since Europe has started thinking about the next stage already, I'm just putting that as tentative. Don't read too much on the timing there. Now, US, you all must have followed in the news. There was a lot of confusion about the fuel economy standard with the governments changing. We finally have clarity on the model year 23 to 26 fuel economy regulations, roughly 7% reduction in CO2 or fuel consumption per year. So very steep reductions. Just to put it in context, in the past 3 or 4 years, we've seen practically no reductions in CO2. So that's already a pretty stringent requirement. Yeah, will lead to a lot of hybridization is my guess, and electrification, of course. The EPA is thinking about so-called multi-pollutant standards as the next step. And by multi-pollutant means addressing all, so both greenhouse gases and criteria pollutants in the same step. So that would be sort of a new way of doing regulations, something worth watching. But again, that will be that rule should be coming up soon. Now, California, as you know, sets its own standards in the US, and it's more stringent than the rest of the country typically. So it leads in, and then the nationwide follows. So we have Level 3 standards phasing in. These are the most stringent gas standards in the world. And then they've already started talking about advanced clean cars 2, which is like Level 4. The idea being they will restrict the total hydrocarbon and NOx emissions to limits to only the non-zero emitting vehicles, so only the IC portion of the fleet, right? So in effect, it's still, it's another step in tightening the NOx standards in California. Okay, Europe, 37.5% reduction in CO2 possibly could be revised to 55% based on this climate law. We have to see this year, it should be coming out the final rule. And then of course in the future, perhaps, you know, there's going to be more tightening towards you know, going towards fully electric vehicles. On criteria pollutants, we are currently at Euro 6D. There was a very recent presentation at the Commission talking about Euro 6E. Primarily it is reduction in conformity factors. I'll talk a little bit about that, but also how plug-in hybrids are treated and so on. And then Euro 7, that's perhaps the biggest thing everyone's looking at. A lot of important changes coming up. I'll cover that, but that's where Europe is heading. And then China similarly, you know, has CFC's corporate average fuel consumption standard. So you can see a 25% reduction moving past 2025. And then China, similar to India, has 6A, 6B, and then China 7, they haven't started really putting it out in the public domain. So I'm just putting a tentative marker there on maybe it starts sometime similar to Europe, right? So lots of changes, and again, other parts of the world are also following with such regulations, right? Now let's dive a little bit into CO2 standards quickly. So again, as I mentioned, you know, the US has set its standards. I'm showing that in more detail on the right. But first, if you look at the left, the European standards are perhaps the most stringent in the world. Not perhaps, they are the most stringent. You can see it's like going up to 55% reduction by 2030. US, China, India shown there. You know, roughly we are talking about I don't know, 3 to 7% reduction in CO2 emissions required per year. Again, putting that in context, we haven't really had big reduction in the past few years. So this will drive a lot of hybridization and improved IC technologies, right? Shown on the right is the US, that's safe at the top was the previous administration regulations. The green is the final. So you can see a significant tightening of the standards by this current administration, right? I put the India 22 regulations on that plot, and in many ways, it's not a fair comparison. There's a lot of nuances to it, right? The test cycles on which they are compared is different. The vehicle sizes and categories in India and US are very different, etc. But just to give you a sense that, well, the Indian fleet is actually quite you know, fuel efficient. We do tend to have, you know, smaller, more efficient cars, and the fleet average fuel economy is pretty good in India. Of course, there's lots of room for improvement, right? Now moving on to criteria pollutants. So this is a slide on gas emission standards, right? Now, just on the left, I want to show that, look, the hydrocarbon and NOx limits have reduced drastically in the last 2 decades, right? We've already had, since the starting of Bharat Stage 1 in 2000 to where we are today, we've seen a 90% reduction in total hydrocarbon and NOx, you know, from tailpipes of modern cars. That's incredible, right? Think about it. A new car is emitting 10% of the emissions compared to what you would get in 2000. But then there's room for improvement, and I'm showing here, you know, there's again Euro 6E, which is currently in Europe, and Euro 7 and Lev 3 in the US, which again, as I said, is the most stringent standard. So let's focus on that. That's the plot in the middle, or that second plot. Now, again, important differences. These bars are what's measured in the lab. Again, in India, it is NEDC. In Europe, it is WLTP. Those diamonds are what are the limits on road. So when you test a car on road, there's a certain you know, allowance given for on-road measurement, because these portable measurement systems are typically not as robust as lab conditions, right? And so that difference between on-road and lab is, or the ratio is what's called as conformity factor. And today the conformity factor is, you know, 1.5, for example, for particles in India. and for NOx, it's similar, but it's 1.43, and it's being reduced. So in Europe, it is already going down, and the latest was 1.1 for NOx, and the idea is to slowly eliminate it altogether. As you can see in Euro 7, I don't have that diamond anymore. So on-road emissions will be the same as what you measure in the lab, right? Plus, you can see the huge reduction that's being proposed. By the way, Euro 7 is still just a proposal. This is not the final limit, but this is one of the proposed limits. And you can see that's another 80 to 90% reduction compared to BS6, all right? So, and same thing with Lev 3, which is already, there are already Lev 3 cars on the road in the US. And so it's showing what's possible, right? And then finally, the extended boundary conditions that could be improved. So, like, there's the speeds at which the cars are being measured, or the altitudes and temperature boundary conditions that are being under which these tests can be done. So there are a lot of improvements to the testing conditions that are being done in Europe with each successive stage, and that's something that that could be pursued in India as well, right? Okay, moving on to particulates. Okay, so similar to gas vehicles, and this is a slide, where I'm on the left. This is diesel and direct injected vehicles only, because gasoline vehicles didn't have a particle mass limit in India for a while. But just showing here that again, compared to BS1, BS6 particle mass limits are 97% lower, right? So again, incredibly clean tailpipes today, 97% reduction in particles, and again, Euro 7 aims to go even tighter. Now, particle mass limits have been traditionally applied only for diesels, for anything that has direct injection into the engine. So same thing in Europe. And starting with BS6, they apply to direct injected vehicles only. In Europe, there was these applied since Euro 5, but India skipped that step. So that is, it starts in BS6. So anything that has direct injection into the engine. In contrast, in Europe, starting with Euro 7, or China, even in China 6, these apply for all vehicles, including those so-called port fuel injected vehicles, right? PFI. So there's GDI on gasoline and PFI, so port fuel injected, right? Gasoline direct injected and port fuel injected. And the limits apply to both in China and in Europe, starting Euro 7. But perhaps more importantly, in terms of the limits, is the particle number limits, because those are what really drive the additional technology content, right? Because it's more difficult to meet particle number standards. These are billions of small particles that are being regulated here, right? The limit today is 60 to the 11, so 600 billion particles per kilometer over the test cycle, and then again on real world driving. So RDs are the real world driving emission limits. Those are typically higher, right? And again, in Euro 7, there's a proposal to go tighter, as low as 1 e to the 11. But also, very importantly, including particles down to 10 nanometers. So the way the limits are set today, only particles down to 23 nanometers are regulated. Anything below that isn't, because of measurement considerations. But now there are new equipment which show that you can measure particles down to 10 nanometers, and so those will be included as well. So again, a very, I would say, comprehensive set of regulations coming up. On the right, I'm just listing some of these improvements again that that are being made, right? I mean, again, the change in test cycle, but conformity factor reductions again, pretty much eliminating those in Europe. And then this is again the very sort of important, I would say, trend or guidance coming from China and Europe, which is to set technology and fuel neutral standards. And by the way, it's always been the case in the US, right? So there's one limit for vehicles. Doesn't matter whether it's a gasoline direct injected or a multi-port injector, or port fuel injected, or a diesel or a CNG or what have you, hybrids, etc. Right? All vehicles have to have the same limit, and that is an important change. Again, China is already following that in China 6, and so all vehicles have to meet the similar limits, right? And then so what does that all mean from a technology perspective, right? So a very quick primer on the products that we offer right here for emissions control. So shown on the left is a is a schematic of this, of what the underbelly of a car looks like, right? And it's we typically refer to as two locations of where these catalysts are added. One is a close coupled, and it's basically just it's closer to the engine, so close coupled, and the other is an underflow position. So you'll have catalysts in these two positions typically. So underflow is slightly further away from the engine. It takes more time for the catalyst to warm up in that location, right? So as I mentioned earlier, we have these two products. One is substrates. These are all ceramic, substrates and filters we're talking about. So flow-through substrates, as they're called, because these are flow-through channels. As you can see here in the middle, those are channel openings, and these are, very fine channels. The nomenclature, like 406 refers to 400 cells per square inch, and 6 is the wall thickness in millionths of inch, right? So 6 mils, or 6 millions of inches the wall thickness. So you can imagine these are very fine channels, very thin walls, and also we can play around with the porosity and so on, pore size of the wall structure, right? Again, how it works shown on the bottom. So basically, gas flows in through these substrates. The channels are coated with a catalyst which has wash coat and precious metal and so on, and CO hydrocarbon reacts with on these precious metals and leaves the tailpipe as CO2 and water, right? So that's sort of the idea there. Particle filters, on the other hand, are similar to substrates, but they have a plug at every alternate channel opening on both inlet and outlet sides. And so the way it works, as you can see on the bottom, exhaust flows in through the inlet, but because there's a plug at the other end, the exhaust is forced to make a turn through the wall, and that's where the soot or ash particles are collected, and then clean gas flows out through the outlet, right? So there's a lot of sort of detail that goes into this. How much ash capacity can you have within the channel? How much soot is added? How does the back pressure change? So there's a lot of engineering that goes into designing the microstructure and the actual the size and cell design and so on, right? So obviously we're not going to cover that today, but there's again connecting to what Dipanshu was saying earlier with what Willard said, we have done this for a long time in Europe and China, and now obviously doing this increasingly in India with BS6 norms, right? So these products are fairly advanced, and we continue to improve them for Euro 7. Okay, I'll take a look at okay, so it took me about 20 minutes. So the main, I would say, the changes now coming, right, are from both from a system level, but also from component levels, right? And I'm trying to bring that out here. So if you look at now the modern petrol treatment systems, we've traditionally had a three-way catalyst, right, which converts again gases, CO, hydrocarbon, and NOx to hydrocarbon to CO2 and water. Moving forward with Euro 6D, but also I would say BS6, stage 2, typically at least the GDI vehicles would have a gasoline particulate filter. Again, it's similar to a diesel particulate filter, but a filter for gasoline applications, and gasoline is petrol. And so, that's being added in India for some of these vehicles, right, which are regulated. Looking further to Euro 7 like systems, there are many ways of addressing the more stringent regulations. One could be adding another three-way catalyst, adding the wash coat load, more catalyst, and so on. By the way, one comment, I'm showing the GPF as a very schematic here. I mean, it could be in the underflow position as well, or it could be in this close coupled position, and it could be the bare or coated with a catalyst. So those are some more details, but it could be, again, an additional three-way catalyst, maybe an addition of hydrocarbon trap is being discussed. So that's where at cold temperatures, basically it's a zeolite based catalyst, which absorbs the hydrocarbon and it releases at higher temperature, which then is converted by the three-way catalyst. Why are all these improvements? Just to take a slight step back, the main problem that we're trying to solve today are these so-called cold start emissions. So that's what happens when you turn on the car in the morning. the engine is cold. Sometimes the ambient temperatures are cold, and the emissions are very high at that time. Your catalysts are not warm; they're not really active, and so what's coming out of the engine is leaving the tailpipe mostly untreated, right? That first minute or so till your engine and our treatment system warms up is where almost 75 to 80% of the emissions occur. Once the catalysts are active, these are incredibly efficient and almost 100% converting, right? So we are trying to address those cold start emissions. So adding hydrocarbon trap, adding additional three-way catalyst in the close coupled position, all of these are aimed at addressing cold start emissions, right? Passive SCR. So SCR, so selective catalytic reduction technology, is traditionally used in diesels, but it's making its way onto gasoline just because of ammonia limits that are being introduced in Europe. Finally, if much of this doesn't work, because now we are really reaching near zero tailpipe emissions, you can actually add like a electrically heated catalyst. So additional thermal management that will just heat up the subsequent three-way catalyst. So you can get a early conversion on these three-way catalysts. So all of these are sort of new system designs that are being discussed. Now, again, going back to that cold start issue, that's why we have for the three-way catalyst, and I've listed this on the right, a low thermal mass substrate. That's an advanced product as well. The idea is it's just a higher porosity, a lower thermal mass product. It's really light. You can actually feel it when you pick it up in your hand. It's about 55% porosity as compared to traditional 35% porosity. All it does is it's lighter, and so it heats up quicker. And again, it shaves off a few tens of seconds in terms of the catalyst light off, and that helps in reducing tailpipe emissions, right? Other things listed on the right, I won't go through them, but high cell density substrates and advancing catalysts, of course, and so on. One thing I will mention that the gasoline particulate filters are incredibly efficient today. We're improving the efficiency, but we started off with 70-80% efficiency. And as regulations tightened, we kept hearing from our customers that we wanted higher and higher filtration. The ones that we make and are developing today are offering more than 90% efficiency. I'm sorry, there should be a percentage there. There should be more than 90% efficiency in the clean state. So that is without any soot or ash accumulated in the channels. So that's really, very, it's a very good technology that, avoids all of these particles from getting out. Yeah. Okay. Light duty diesel, I won't spend too much time on it, but obviously diesels are losing a lot of market share nowadays, but it's unfortunate because really diesels are truly very, very clean now, especially the after Euro 6 and with RDE testing, lots of data coming out that the diesels can be as clean as gasolines, and more importantly that on road they are as clean as in the lab. But you can see, I mean, this is a recent Volkswagen, presentation at the Vienna Motor Symposium where they showed the system that they're using. I know it's difficult to see here, but it's essentially, both a closed couple and an underfloor SCR system with dual urea dosing. You need to dose urea as a reductant for the NOx. But what I just want to show here is, again, the complexity is increasing. You have typically a lean NOx trap or a DOC for diesel oxidation catalyst for cold start emissions, followed by SCR. SCR is where ammonia reacts with NOx to form nitrogen, so you have to dose this ammonia, and then new ideas being discussed, such as this closed coupled SCR, or again electrically heated catalyst to solve the cold start issue. Again, same issue here in diesels. You want to get these catalysts active soon, and so anything that you can do towards promoting the cold start activities is what's desired, right? Okay, so I know that was a lot of content, but very quickly in 5 minutes, I will talk about heavy duty. So similar to light duty, regulations are proceeding on heavy duty. California is leading the charge here with this ultra low NOx regulations. This is perhaps the most complex regulations on the heavy duty side, requiring up to a 90% reduction in NOx compared to the 2010 standards in the US, which are already fairly stringent. So this is going to be a very massive, change in terms of the technologies that are going to be added. But again, this phase is in, there's a first step in 24, then in 27, and then there's more changes in durability, etc., that are part of that regulation, which we won't go into today. The nationwide, the EPA is also coming up with its own version, the Cleaner Trucks Initiative, which should be closely aligned with California. And then in parallel, there's greenhouse gas regulations in the US as well, which are happening. So again, an important consideration, whether it's heavy duty or light duty, is that all of these reductions in NOx particles have to happen without really affecting the fuel economy of the vehicles much, right? And that's the challenge that OEMs are faced with, right? Similar to light duty, there's a multi-pollutant rule that's being discussed on heavy duty for beyond this decade. Europe, again, greenhouse gas reductions, very, very tough standards, up to 30% reduction by the end of this decade, but could be further revised downward. We are in Euro 6E, which just started in 21, and that includes cold start emissions under real world driving, and also conformity factor for particles in service compliance. And then discussions for Euro 7 again have started, and well, a proposal is due anytime now, and steep reductions being looked at, both in NOx and particles, right? China, India, again, similar to light duty, have 2 stages of the stage 6 introduction. In India, again, the BS6 phase 2 starts in 23 with real world drive testing. No news on this next stage. Obviously, I'm just adding it for looking further into the rest of this decade and beyond, right? So, and I think this is my last slide. I just wanted to bring out what are the technologies that are being brought into the heavy duty space for meeting upcoming regulations, right? So typically today we have a DOC DPF SCR similar to light duty diesel, and an ammonia slip catalyst, right? It cleans up any ammonia that comes out of the comes out after the SCRs, right? Moving further, here are all the systems that are being discussed. I mean, there's many more, but I just again wanted to pull out some of the trends here. We're talking about adding closed couple SCRs. So something, ahead of this DOC DPF, you have another SCR system with perhaps a heated dosing. So again, trying to get that urea to ammonia conversion quicker for reacting with NOx, adding another closed couple DOC perhaps. SCR and filters is a good technology coming, especially used a lot on light duty diesels, but also for off-road, for example. But again, SCR catalyst integrated with the filter, and then electrically heated catalysts also being discussed for heavy duty space. Again, trying to get this SCR up to temperature real quick. By the way, urea injection can be done at any point, but the SCR gets active at about 200 C or above. So again, you want to get that that conversion started at or the temperature reaching 200 C as soon as possible, right? And then this sort of the Cadillac version of having everything in there, close couple DOC, SCR, so on, and even this idea for second filter to capture any additional particles that make their way through the system. So lots of changes coming on the heavy duty side. Just wanted to put it out there that these systems are quite complex, but they are really taking us towards near zero tailpipe emissions, right? So I won't go through the list on the right, but you can see basically all of these different components adding up. One thing quickly, maybe high filtration DPFs. So yes, again, similar to light duty, filters are improving on heavy duty, and very, very high filtration will be required for meeting the upcoming standards. Yep. So I know that was a lot, but I will stop now and see what questions you may have.
Thank you, Ameya, for that very broad and very detailed and comprehensive perspective on global regulations and trends. We do have from the stipulated time, we have about 5 minutes, but I'm going to take the liberty of extending this session by another 5 minutes or so that we can take at least some questions from our delegates participating today. So quickly, Ameya, if you can, you mentioned in your presentation that hydrocarbon and NOx emissions from modern vehicles have reduced by 90% in the last 2 decades, and there is still room for further improvement. Now, can you help us understand how do we go about achieving further reduction?
Yeah, so I think the main, I would say the theme across the world nowadays is that you want to make sure that these vehicles are emitting the same on the road as they are on the under the lab conditions, which are typically more well controlled, right? And so what that would mean is essentially reducing these so-called conformity factors, right? Making sure that you have good instrumentation to actually measure on the road, and then of course making technologies that meet these limits on the road, right? So that is the main sort of difference. I would say the other is making sure that the lab test cycles are themselves very well representative of real driving. So again, this change from NEDC to WLTP is very important. Even in the US, there's a lot of changes every time there's a regulatory step, and there are changes being discussed there. So that, and then I would say again, the main focus today should be cold start emissions, right? And it is. So making sure that the emissions in these first few couple of minutes after you turn on your car are reduced is going to go a long way in making sure that the overall emissions are reduced. And again, that comes through improved standards, but also improved technologies that would help get the catalyst warmed up sooner.
All right. Worldwide, Ameya, there's been a big question over the viability of diesel as a technology. Yet, there are new technologies being developed that continue to make diesel engines cleaner and more efficient. Right now, what's your assessment, both from a global and Indian perspective, as far as diesel technology is concerned?
Yeah, so I mean, unfortunately, again, yes, diesel has taken quite a beating in the past few years, and the share of diesels is going down pretty significantly in both in Europe and India, which is the other big market. There are going to be applications for which diesels are just better suited, and there's a certain share that remains even in Europe, and I believe even in India it could persist. Clearly, it's not the share has gone down. It is not, that trend will perhaps continue, but I will say this, that again, at least as far as the issues that diesels have had in the past with high NOx and that image of not being as clean is a thing of the past. I mean, very reputed organizations have now come up with reports which show that Euro 6 compliant or BS6 compliant diesels are extremely clean. They are not just meeting the standards, but are going well below the standards, and are actually, some are near Euro 7 levels already. So a lot of, I would say, room and for improvement, and also they still do offer a slight advantage when it comes to fuel economy. So there's that. And again, going back to the performance aspect, I think there's just something about the feel of a diesel that some people like, and that will make sure that there's some room for diesels to remain around. Obviously, it's all light duty. Heavy duty diesels clearly have a long way ahead, and they are still the chosen technology, I would say.
Sure. Amit, the next question is more about, as we see mobility expanding, we see different technologies sort of coexisting, right? Petrol, diesel, hybrid, CNG, and of course, electric vehicles coming in. So from that perspective, if you have to look at the future and the growth of the regulatory landscape for the emissions, how do you see that panning out across the world?
Yeah, so I think we are going to just see a significant increase in the powertrain options that are available, again, based on consumer preferences, policy decisions, so on and so forth. And I just pulled up this slide because I did want to highlight this thing. I think it's very important to follow this trend, global trend of having technology and fuel neutral regulations. So making sure that doesn't matter whether it's a diesel or a CNG or whatever, that similar limits are proposed, and then that's followed. And then again, this whole idea that making sure that all of these vehicles are as clean on the road is very important. I think again, these various options are going to be available and will play an important role in meeting various requirements. So as an example, right, on the heavy duty side, CNG is seen as a very important technology for low NOx, right? And that's clearly reflecting in an increasing share in CNG, for example, right? I would also highlight hybrids as playing a very important role. You'll see that hybrids are increasing their share as the fuel economy regulations are strengthening across the world. And then of course there's electrics, which are seen as an important part of the OEM portfolio, again to meet CO2 requirements. But policy decisions will play a very important role in how quickly each of these are growing in their own market share, right? But yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting decade. We're going to see all sorts of powertrain options being offered and grow in their own segments.
Right. Specific to commercial vehicles, the heavy duty segment, do you expect to see different kinds of emission regulations for different classes of CVs in the future?
Yeah, so heavy duty vehicles are different, right, from light duty, in the sense that you can use one engine, you can develop one engine, but it could be used in a very different application. The same engine could be used on a school bus or on a garbage truck or on a heavy duty long haul truck. And that's you can see that being reflected in how Europe is, for example, treating these in Euro 7. And you do have important distinction on both the durability requirements and the tailpipe limits for medium duty vehicles versus heavy duty, long haul vehicles. So there are both difference in terms of the actual limits, but how long these are on the road. And so, accordingly, like, taking California as an example, we are talking about moving the durability limits from 435,000 miles today to almost 800,000 miles or beyond in 2027 and 2030. Now, that's a long time for us as suppliers to make sure that these parts last on the road. And we're doing that. And again, but that's for long haul trucks. For medium duty, there's other considerations that come into play. So yeah, certainly regulators are taking a closer look at the way these standards are set according to the various class. And I just added a very quick thing, and there's no light duty, but when you talk about electrified powertrains, for example, there are other issues which come up, like you have these high powered cold start emissions for light duty. When you're going down the highway and suddenly the engine comes on for a plug-in hybrid, emissions can also be high there. And so US is taking a closer look at how to make sure that those emissions are also regulated. So depending on the class of vehicle and the type of powertrain and so on, the regulations are being really fine-tuned now to make sure that you have real near zero emitting tailpipes.
Wonderful. There's one of your comments which actually generated quite a lot of interest in our comments today is about non-tailpipe emissions. Now, what are some of the initiatives taken to mitigate such emissions in vehicles?
That's a good question. I unfortunately I'm not very familiar with all the technologies that are being discussed in that space. But clearly, as you can imagine, I mean, there's two, right? The main is tire wear. And tire companies are coming up with just improved tires, which have more resistance and are not being abraded as readily as tires today. And so that's one. For brakes, there are new systems being developed, and I've seen a few out there, which you're talking about little, if you will, vacuum systems right at the brake pads, where as soon as these particles are generated, these are being sucked by these systems. So again, making sure that the emissions right at the source are addressed, either through improved materials or through mitigating systems. So of course, these are not the same as tailpipe technologies, but they are very different. But yeah, it's an important source. I mean, most policy makers have shown now, I mean, Europe, US, others, that starting 2030-ish or so, you're going to see non-tailpipe emissions now exceeding the tailpipe ones for particulates.
Okay. I'm going to take two more questions, Amma. One is from our participant today, Paul Crickman. He wants to know, do you or Corning expect GPF design, porosity, size, etc., to evolve further to handle potential Euro 7 limits? Or is current design and technology likely sufficient?
No. So we certainly see the need for high filtration efficiency increasing, and we are adapting to that. The designs are changing primarily at the microstructure level, at the wall, the pore structure level, making sure that our filtration is very high. So we change the porosity to make sure that the filtration is very high, again in the clean state. So remember that when you have a little bit of soot and ash on the channel, it acts as a further filtration mechanism, and so it can be very high very quickly. But when it's clean, the filtration can be not as high. So we are making sure that that is improved as well. Also, of course, design changes in terms of the sizing and so on according to the needs. But just to quickly share something, I used to be a technology manager for Japan and Korea. So when I was interacting with customers at that time, when we were just beginning with Euro 6, early on, customers would all say, we don't think we really need GPFs anymore. Then they start saying, well, we think we need them maybe, with 40-50% filtration should be enough. Then we started hearing, no, we need 75-80%. And now with Euro 6 fully enforced and with for the improvements, now we are hearing, well, we need 95% plus efficiency right from 0 kilometers. So that improvement in GPS have actually been a very significant part of our development, and it really continues. I think that's going to continue. One last quick comment: GPS can be both bare and coated, catalyzed with three-way catalyst. So we also have to make sure that our structure is adequate for good coating and for including a lot of three-way catalyst coating in there as well. So lots of considerations for both filtration and back pressure, which we didn't touch upon today, but lower back pressure is very important for our products as well.
Sure. One final question, Amaya. This is from Ravi Shankar Pandurang. He says, battery-powered EVs, hydrogen cell technology, green hydrogen power, and other alternate fuels, which looks to be the most promising in terms of a 5-year horizon or more, especially focusing on emerging markets like India, China, that will and already are emerging contributors to pollution.
Yeah, I mean, talking of alternative powertrains, and so I'm reading into the question really just focusing on these new zero emitting technologies, right? Zero emitting the tailpipe. I think, of course, batteries look to be the most mature today, just because of the extent of market penetration in Europe, China, and the US, and so on. So I think that's a little more set up for success. But at the end of the day, I think it really boils down to policy decisions on how governments are promoting these, what incentives are being provided, how the manufacturing base is being set up. But perhaps the biggest thing is, I would say, the infrastructure and the cost to the end consumer, right? That will dictate how quickly these penetrate. I mean, I think the infrastructure is key. If you don't have, quick ways to recharge the electric vehicles or to refuel a hydrogen vehicle, that's, you're not going to get too many buyers. And so that's the challenge most countries are being faced with. In the short term, I would say for India, right? In the short term, yes, electrics, and by that I mean both plugins and full electrics have a better potential than hydrogen just because of the infrastructure being, but getting beyond that initial few percentage will require more massive investment in infrastructure, which is going to be the key challenge. I would say though that plug-in hybrids or even just regular hybrids are an incredibly good technology that would and should be promoted in India, just because you do get a 30% reduction just by regular hybrids with a small upcharge as compared to a gasoline vehicle, and plug-in hybrids is like a I don't know 60-70% reduction if you charge it properly. So there are, and plus you have an IC engine to take care of your longer driving needs. So there are these which are initially popular, and then as the infrastructure gets built out, I think the other powertrains will catch on. Not to mention, and I could talk about this for an hour, but to make sure that the electricity supply itself is being cleaned up, right? We are still 50% of our electricity comes from coal. So making sure that the renewable content goes up while we are promoting electrics is very important. So I'm sure the policies are being discussed on that front as well, but those are some of the things that are, reliance on material supply for batteries. All of that has to come together. So that all that goes into predicting how our fleet evolves over time.
Fantastic. I mean, such a wonderful session we've had. Unfortunately, we've run completely out of time. We're 10 minutes behind our scheduled duration today. I wish we could continue, but for all our participants, the good news is this is a series of dialogues and discussions that we have lined up with Corning. So there are more sessions coming up over the next couple of months. So please do stay tuned in. And Ameya, thank you very much for taking all the questions and for that fantastic presentation, and to all our delegates today for participating in this session. Until we meet next time, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Dipanshu. See ya.
Bye-bye.